Hello everyone, I am the Meta Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite anti-gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from the Innistrad Crimson Vow commander, Umbris Fear Manifest. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, pages get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, pages got a chance to see this video earlier. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Umbris is a 1/1 Nightmare Horror for 3 generic, 1 blue and 1 black. While this might seem like a hefty casting cost, it's almost never going to be a 1/1 since it gets +1/+1 for each card your opponents own in exile. Notwithstanding, it also helps itself out with its second ability. Whenever it or another Nightmare or Horror enters the battlefield under your control, target opponent exiles cards to the top of their library until they exile a land card. While this has the makings of a mill deck, since Umbris becomes so large, you're also simultaneously piloting a Voltron deck. The best thing about this pump effect is that even if Umbris bites the dust, it'll still be that big and probably bigger since it's so difficult to get cards back from exile as of the recording of this video. So you're not only perma-milling opponents, but can also one-shot any of them out of nowhere, making even Randy Orton proud. On top of all this, since Umbris triggers whenever a certain subtype of creature enters the battlefield, you might also be able to build a commander deck that's not just mill with Voltron, but mill with Voltron and a Tribal, the ultimate Timmy Tammy trifecta. So let's start off with some of the nightmares and or horrors that I found were best for the deck since they're good on their own as well, but obviously much better once Umbris is out. Ravenous Chupacabra, Slum Reaper, Mind Flayer, and Sludge Monster can all help deal with creatures. While the Chupacabra has a soft spot in my heart since an originally Puerto Rican cryptid made its way into a magic card, the fact remains that it's Necrotal that can trigger Umbris. Slum Reaper takes it a step further by having each player sacrifice a creature, meaning we're just sacrificing it to itself. Mind Flayer gets rid of any creature by stealing it, which is also great against other Voltron decks like Slum Reaper is. Sludge Monster, while not getting rid of the creature per se, does nerf it by making it a vanilla 2/2, and not just when it enters the battlefield but when it attacks as well. Toxel Corrosive, another way to deal with opponents' pesky creatures, might be a bit beefy to cast, but it's not that impossible in a black deck. While Toxel triggering Umbris was its main consideration, the fact that you can potentially wipe the board of tokens in 2 end steps is nothing to scoff at. You'll also create slugs that you can sacrifice for cards, which is great. Notwithstanding, this combos amazingly with the previously mentioned Sludge Monster, since it's another way to get slime counters on creatures. Toxel isn't amazing on its own, but as part of the 99 in this deck, it still does some work. Hullbreaker Horror, Overcharged Amalgam, Spellskite, and Phyrexian Revoker are some more horrors that provide interaction. The Kraken Horror is just a disgusting card all over. Being able to always bounce something whenever we cast it is so impressive, especially when it means bouncing potential blockers before swinging. Oh, and it's a 7/8 with flash that can't be countered for just 7 mana. Super busted. As for the Amalgam, the best thing about it is that it also hits triggered and activated abilities, so you can very easily prevent Planeswalkers from ultimating or anything else your opponents think can't be dealt with. Plus, it's a 3/3 flyer, which is just icing on the cake. Spellskite is amazing for the Voltron aspect of smashing face with a 40+ power commander. Any effect that might hit Umbris can be redirected to Spellskite instead, all for just 2 life. The Revoker is great at hitting commanders before activated abilities before they even hit the battlefield. If any opponent is playing with a Planeswalker commander, make sure to laugh maniacally as it enters the battlefield. Some horrors straight up synergize even further on their own, like Nemesis of Reason. It's a 3/7, so it'll more than likely survive attacking, which is great because it mills the defending player for 10 when it does. While those cards aren't exiled yet, the fact remains that it exiles cards when it enters if Umbris is already in play, and having 7 toughness means it can block and then be used with another amazing legend in the 99, which we will unsurprisingly see in a bit. Startled Awake, while a sorcery and not a horror or a nightmare, mills an opponent for 13 cards. While that might not seem like a lot in Commander for a 1-of effect, it can be pseudo-disturbed by paying 5 mana to put it transformed onto the battlefield from your graveyard. That's right, as a nightmare, and quite a fitting name too. Persistent Nightmare not only triggers Umbris when it enters the battlefield, but if it manages to get through, you can return it to your hand afterwards to then continue milling an opponent afterwards, and then pseudo-disturb it again for even further value. Such a fun card to play. Hell's Caretaker, another amazing horror that works on its own, but can be used for great effect in this deck, especially when recycling creatures. As we just saw with Persistent Nightmare, recycling our nightmares and or horrors from our graveyard is something that Umbris won't mind one bit. We do have to sacrifice a creature and we can only do it during our upkeep, but that's fine. Imagine being able to recur Slum Reaper or Ravenous Chupacabra each upkeep, or being able to recur any killed off creature, making most removal effects moot. So good. Kirk, Son of Yawgmoth, the last horror of the deck, is amazing in any black deck, but just that much better here for triggering Umbris. Kirk's an amazing commander in his own right, but as one of the 99 in this Umbris deck, you just can't go wrong. The mana acceleration he provides is insane. Yes, you'll lose life very quickly, but you can just as quickly recover it. But that's something I'll get to further along in the video. Nightmare Shepherd and Ashok Nightmare Muse, while not being nightmares nor horrors themselves, serve to create nightmare tokens. If you'd rather immediately reuse a creature's enter the battlefield trigger than wait around for Hell's Caretaker, this demon gets the job done. The tokens are unfortunately 1/1, but that's the price to pay. This version of Ashok, while being incredibly weak and underused in every other format, including Commander, is absolutely amazing here. You can play it on curve in the sense of first casting Umbris and then casting it. Its +1 gets up 2/3 Nightmare triggering Umbris, but then the token itself exiles cards from an opponent's library when it attacks or blocks, which is some nice icing on that cake. Its -3 is great interaction that bounces a problematic permanent, or getting rid of a token, and then the opponent exiles a card from their hand. This is an amazing ability to do on Hellbound opponents. Its ultimate isn't that powerful, but since it's not limited to cards exiled by Ashok, you can potentially get the best 3 cards exiled so far from your opponents for free. Definitely nothing to scoff at. You can also create Nightmare and Horror tokens with Maskwood Nexus. For 3 untapping, you create a Shapeshifter with Changeling, so it's going to trigger Umbris. However, even better than that is its main ability, which turns all of your creatures into each creature type. So the rest of the creatures in the deck are going to trigger Umbris, which is another source of W's for the deck. Speaking of triggering Umbris, Conjurer's Closet and Thassa Deep Dwelling help with not only triggering Umbris by blinking up Nightmare or Horror, but any other creature we want with an enter the battlefield trigger, including Umbris itself. If that weren't enough, Thassa could tap down creatures as a mana sink, making it easier to potentially one-shot an opponent with Umbris when the time comes. Panharmonicon is included as well since it can not only work on its own with Umbris, but with the rest of the creatures with the enter the battlefield triggers. This artifact does some serious work. Being able to double down on Umbris' trigger is no joke. Naturally, being a blue-black deck that uses creatures to mill and exile cards from libraries, we couldn't go without having the big daddy of mill himself in the 99, Phoenix, God of Deception. Not only can you use Phoenix to continue milling opponents at the beginning of the end step before yours, but if the board state is solved because you can't swing in, Umbris gets so large in games that just tapping it down a couple of times thanks to Phoenix might be enough to mill out an opponent. If that weren't enough, Phoenix is an indestructible blocker when devotion is met. Fleet Swallower and Imperious Mindbreaker have the potential of milling insane amounts of cards. Granted, the Mindbreaker has to be soul bound to a huge beater in order to get the effect, but we already know it's meant to be soul bounded to Umbris. If you're exiling cards from graveyards and then swinging in with a huge Umbris soul bounded to the Mindbreaker, you just doubled its power and toughness. This card is just insane here. Mind Crank and Sort of Body of Mind do something similar. Hitting an opponent with a huge creature when Mind Crank is out will also mill them for that many cards. Sure, Umbris only needs to give 21 damage to end the game, but that's pretty much guaranteed even from early on if you're exiling what you mill. As a bonus, the sword gives you a 2/2 wolf which you can use for chum blocking or as Hell Caretaker's fodder. Or as for more nightmares and horrors entering the battlefield if you have Maskwood Nexus out. Fractured Sanity, Maddening Cacophony, Mind Grind, and Tasha's Hideous Laughter are some more mill effects that hit all opponents. Naturally, the best one is Hideous Laughter because it's already exiling without any additional setup. However, the fact remains that the first 3 spells mill a ton of cards at once. So once you're able to start exiling graveyards, Umbris is going to be one Avengers level threat. Traumatize, Jace, Memory Adept, and Nephalia Drownyard are some more mill effects, but they only hit a single opponent. Traumatize is a great way to get the ball rolling since you're milling half of someone's commander-sized library. That's nothing to scoff at, especially if you pull it off before or after casting Umbris. Jace is a great way to mill 10 each turn, but you can only use his other abilities for value. The land doesn't take up a slot in the deck and is a great way to sink your mana at the beginning of your end step before yours if you didn't need to use your available mana for any responses or card draw spells. Dauthi Voidwalker, Laynon of the Void, and Bojuka Bog are those exile effects that I've been mentioning for a while now. While there aren't any exile effects as possible as the mill effects, if we're doing these mill effects with either the Dauthi or enchantment out, Umbris explodes out of nowhere. So these are obvious includes, especially the land, since it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. Ashok Dream Render does something similar, but you don't need to activate it every turn. But once opponents have enough cards in their graveyards to make it worthwhile, do it. As a bonus, its static effect prevents opponents from searching their libraries. Good luck tutoring for any responses or even ramping for mana. Time to make green decks fair in comparison. Speaking of, Sire of Stagnation punishes green decks further by exiling the top 2 cards of their library whenever they get landfall, plus we get to draw 2 cards as well. This card is just so good. Opponents are hardly ever going to not play their lands. They'd rather pay the cost of exiling the top 2 cards of the deck. However, the pain stings greater since we're also drawing 2 cards when they do. Oh, and it's a 5/7/2. Oblivion Sower and Cosima, God of the Voyage, take the land theme even further. If we've exiled a ton of lands from an opponent, casting Oblivion Sower puts us in green levels of land ramp. is just so good here. Yes, being so highly costed is a drawback, but by the time we have the mana for it, there will be plenty of exile lands to seal. Plus, we'll need the mana to fuel our deck for when we become an arch enemy afterwards. Cross summon while being the face part of the card isn't the part we're ever casting though, at least for me. I've always cast the Omen Keel when playing this deck. That's because I can steal lands with the Omen Keel. Yes, I'd be reducing Umbris' power and toughness, but that's negligible compared to never missing a land drop if I keep swinging in with the Omen Keel. So good. And for just 2 mana too. We can also just straight up win when we exile opponent's cards. Helm of Obedience is an instant win when we have either Leyline of the Void or Dauthi Voidwalker in play. We could just pay 1 and tap it since they'll never have a creature hit the graveyard due to the replacement effect, essentially exiling their entire library. They won't lose until they attempt to draw their next card though, so you can do this in response to getting combat damage on another opponent with Umbris. Then you just took out 2 opponents in one fell swoop. Web of Inertia, while not as broken as the Helm, is still amazing nonetheless. If opponents can't keep any graveyards because all their cards are being exiled, they'll never be able to attack us since they won't be able to exile cards from their graveyards. And even if they were able to, that's just more food for Umbris. As for the Voltron aspect of the deck, we don't have to go so hard on it since Umbris essentially pumps itself in such a way that we don't have to do it all over again each time it leaves the battlefield. We just have to make sure it's able to connect as well as be protected since it's relatively expensive commander to cast multiple times in a game. Whispersoul Cloak, Thassa God of the Sea, Rogue's Passage, and to a certain extent, Shizo Death's Storehouse do a good job in making sure that Umbris gets through. The Cloak also has the added bonus of giving Umbris Shroud, making it possibly the best equipment for the deck. Thassa is amazing as well since she's cheap to cast and scries 1 during our upkeep, which is great. The lands don't even take up a slot in the deck, so they're a no-brainer. Swiftfoot Boots and Champion's Home are some more ways of protecting Umbris for a low mana cost, so their inclusion here is pretty self-explanatory. Shadow Spear and Witch's Clinic further take advantage of how huge Umbris gets. Even if the table were to gang up on you, or Umbris gets constantly chump blocked, if you're gaining 40 to 50 life each time it's blocked or blocks, it's going to be very difficult to take you out. As a bonus, the Spear also gives trample, so it's almost guaranteed to give the one-shot kill when Umbris is well above the point of Avenge's level threat. Even so, Helm of the Host is my favorite equipment for the deck. Each time this triggers and you get a non-legendary copy of Umbris, it triggers itself and the original, giving you even bigger creatures. The level of madness this produces if not dealt with is insane. Make sure you keep your calculator handy. The following cards in the deck are the essential card advantage, responses, and mana acceleration of any deck. Cyclonic Rift and Toxic Deluge are given since we want to clear the path for Umbris to start taking out opponents. The best thing about the Deluge is that more often than not, Umbris is the largest creature on the board. However, while it will cause Umbris to lower in power of toughness, if those creatures you killed get exiled, Umbris will just get pumped up again, maybe even enough to kill off an opponent. Pact of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, Swan Song, Negate, and Mana Drain are some more ways to either protect Umbris when it's about to kill someone off, or to prevent that pesky combo player from winning out of nowhere themselves. If anyone's going to RKO anyone in this match, it's going to be Umbris. Blue Sun Zenith, Commander's Insight, Diviner's Portent, Drawn in Dreams, and Stroke of Genius help us draw into our interaction as well as our other cards, so I'm so happy that Wizards essentially reprinted Stroke of Genius so many times with different names. Thanks to that, we have something to do with our unused mana at the beginning of the end step before ours. Especially with Urborg to move Yawgmoth, Cabal Coffers, and Nykthos trying to Nyx in the deck. Not only is this Black's way of getting ahead of mana, take that guy as Cradle, but they're also useful in helping recast Umbris multiple times from the command zone if it came to it. Either way, the deck's also running Sword of the Animus and Sword of Hearth and Home for that colorless land ramp. Even if it isn't Umbris, we'll undoubtedly have some creature we can send to the front lines in the name of land-based ramp. As a bonus, Sword of Hearth and Home also gives Umbris relevant protection, which not only helps prevent targeted spells of effects, but from being blocked by those creatures too. And it has a blink effect, which is great for the creatures in this deck. Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Arcane Signet, Dirmir Signet, Talisman of Dominance, and Jewel Lotus are the deck's mana rocks, and need no further explanation than the deck isn't green and needs its mana acceleration, however it can get it. In any case, Umbris is a commander that benefits from getting out early, since you can then take advantage of the other nightmares and horrors entering the battlefield. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 7 fetch lands, Underground Sea, Watery Grave, Sunken Hollow, Fetid Pools, Ice Tunnels, Drowned Catacomb, Tainted Isle, Morphic Pool, Shipwreck Marsh, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 4 of each basic land. As with all of my deck techs, you do not need to run the more expensive mana acceleration pieces like Underground Sea, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Jewel Lotus, Ancient Tomb, etc. if you don't have them, won't proxy them, or aren't playing online. You can very easily swap them out for budget substitutes and the deck will still run well enough. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Umbris Fear Manifest. While it's not the first mill deck I've released on the channel, nor even the first tribal mill deck I've released on the channel, Umbris continues not only the mill and tribal archetype, but the Voltron archetype as well. And in a more evil fashion, since the goal is to exile those cards, not simply mill them to the graveyard. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I'm Method Kirby, and happy brewing.